One day, when a boy by the name of Sam was about 2 years old, his father was changing him on the changing table. And he looked up at his father and he said, "When I was your age, I used to change your nappy." His father was obviously a little bit perturbed by this, but just thought he must have misheard what Sam had said. And so he ignored him. A few days later, Sam said something else that got his father thinking. And over the next few months, his parents started to put together a picture. The young boy thought he was his own grandfather. At one point, his parents asked him how he died, and Sam grabbed his head and shook his head back violently. What had actually happened is Sam's grandfather had died about 18 months before he was born of a cerebral hemorrhage. Now, when I was younger, I didn't really think much about reincarnation and past lives. But in my work as an energy healer, I found myself dealing with past life trauma on a daily basis. I grew up in a Catholic family, and we just never discussed the concept of reincarnation and past lives. It wasn't until my early 20s when I started reading some interesting books that I began to get interested in the topic. One of the books I came across was Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And in this book, he recounts how he was helping one of his clients, who he named Catherine, with some phobias that she was experiencing. And Dr. Weiss was a Yale-trained psychiatrist and was doing some hypnotherapy on his clients. And suddenly, after a few sessions, what happened is his client started recounting details from a previous life. Now, he didn't really know what to make of this. He just continued with the process and contemplated how the story might have come to be. But what really got his attention was the fact that she started to heal after the sessions where she recounted the experiences in her past lives. In a later session, she managed to actually pass on a message to him from his deceased father and deceased child. And he believes there was no other way for her to get that information except from them. After reading Many Lives, Many Masters, I kind of just accepted the concept of reincarnation. The way the book laid it out kind of just resonated with me, and I didn't feel the need to try and get any further proof. It resonated with me as truth, and so I accepted it as true. It wasn't until much later that I realized that a lot of people had resistance to the concept of reincarnation, that I started to explore it a little bit further. The first thing I needed to do was try and understand why reincarnation was such a taboo and why there's so much resistance to the concept of reincarnation in the West. And to understand that, I needed to understand the religious underpinnings of these belief systems. In the East, where their beliefs are formed and influenced by the religions of Buddhism and Hinduism, the concept of reincarnation is readily accepted. In the West, however, where we are influenced more by the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, the concept is a bit messier, especially when we consider the point of view of the Christian church. And the Christian church's doctrine is to reject the concept of reincarnation. But if one has to look at where this doctrine came into being, you kind of start to discover that it wasn't always so. Now, if you consider the pagan religions that existed before the birth of Christianity, well, they all openly accepted the concept of reincarnation. It wasn't something that needed to be discussed or contemplated. It was simply a fact. This is what is. But it wasn't until AD 553 that the Catholic Church changed its stance on reincarnation. What happened then was the Roman Emperor Justinian moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. The church split into the Western Church, headed by Pope Vigilius, and that was headquartered in Rome, and the Eastern Church, headquartered in Constantinople, headed up by Emperor Justinian. At around that time, they held the Fifth Ecumenical Council, where all the bishops of the church got together to discuss various matters. And on the agenda for the Fifth Ecumenical Council was the concept of reincarnation. Pope Vigilius supported it, but because they needed to travel to Constantinople, only 6 bishops from the Western Church made the journey, whilst there were 159 bishops from the Eastern Church, headed by Emperor Justinian. Pope Vigilius boycotted the vote. He never signed it. He was persecuted, imprisoned, and almost killed for his resistance. And thereafter, the concept of reincarnation was effectively banned from discussion in the Christian church. I also became very interested in the academic research into reincarnation. And as you start to read about the academic research that's been done, one can't help but come across a man by the name of Dr. Ian Stevenson. Dr. Stevenson was a remarkable person who finished top of his class and was enjoying a very successful mainstream career with some 60 publications in the medical and psychiatric literature to his credit. He had become chairman of the departments of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Virginia in 1957. The following year, the American Society for Psychical Research announced a contest for the best essay on the topic of paranormal mental phenomena and their relationship to the problem of survival of the human personality after bodily death. Dr. Stevenson thought that this was interesting and submitted an essay in which he analyzed 44 cases of people who appeared to remember former incarnations. He went on to win the contest, saying, "I couldn't see how they could all be faked or they could all be a deception." Dr. Stevenson went on to write a number of books on the subject of reincarnation and study thousands and thousands of cases. He received a call from Eileen Garrett, the head of the Parapsychology Foundation. She had learned of a case in India similar to the ones Ian had written about and offered to pay his expenses to investigate it. Ian accepted the offer, and by the time of the trip, he had heard of about 4 or 5 cases in India and another 2 cases in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. But by the time they got to India, he had come across a total of 25 cases that he studied. And when he went to Ceylon, he studied 7 cases. Next came a man by the name of Chester Carlson. Carlson had invented the Xeroxing process and founded the Xerox Corporation. He offered Ian financial support for studying new cases and later left a bequest to make his research possible. In one of the early cases, he studied a young girl in Sri Lanka, who one day heard her mother mentioning the name of an obscure town, Kataragama. The girl had never been to that town. The girl informed her mother that she had drowned there when her mentally challenged brother had pushed her in the river. She said she had a bald father named Herath, who sold flowers in a market near the Buddhist stupa, and that she lived in a house that had a glass window in the roof, dogs in the backyard that were tied up and fed meat, and the house was next door to a big Hindu temple. Out of the 30 statements that the girl had made, Dr. Stevenson was able to verify 27 of these by investigating and interviewing neighbors, people in the village. He would look for co-workers or birth records, death records, anything in the newspaper. He would basically do a thorough investigation of these cases to find out what was true and what was not true. Dr. Stevenson's work was continued by a man by the name of Dr. Jim Tucker, who continued with the research. One of the cases that Dr. Tucker investigated was a boy by the name of James Leninger. As a young boy, James loved playing with toy planes, but around the time of his second birthday, he started having horrific nightmares 4 or 5 times a week. He would dream of being in a plane crash, and then during the day, he would talk about this plane crash to his parents, explaining that he had been a pilot and that he had flown off of a boat. When his dad asked him the name of the boat, he said the boat was called Natoma. He told his parents that he had been shot down by the Japanese and that he had been killed at Iwo Jima, and that his friend on the boat was called Jack Larson. Well, his parents investigated this, and it turns out there was an aircraft carrier called the USS Natoma Bay, and that it was stationed in the Pacific during World War II. In fact, it was involved in Iwo Jima and lost one pilot there, a young man named James Huston. James Huston's plane crashed exactly the way that James Leninger had described. Hits in the engine, exploding into fire, and crashing into the water, sinking rapidly. And when that happened, the pilot of the plane next to his was named Jack Larson. Another interesting case involved a young boy by the name of Ryan Hammonds. When he was 4 years old, he began directing imaginary movies, and shouts of action often echoed from his room. But the play became a concern for Ryan's parents when he began waking up in the middle of the night, screaming in terror and clutching his chest, saying he dreamed that his heart exploded. One day, as his mother Cindy was tucking him into bed, he suddenly grabbed her hand and said, "Mama, I think I used to be someone else." He recounted many details of a big white house with a swimming pool and a life in Hollywood with 3 sons, but he couldn't remember their names and would begin to cry. His mother didn't really know what to do, but began to research and look on the internet for evidence of reincarnation, and she also got some books from the library in Hollywood, thinking the pictures might help him. One day, they were paging through one of the Hollywood books, and Ryan stopped at a black and white picture taken in a 1930s movie, Night After Night. 2 men in the center of the picture were confronting one another. "Hey, Mama," said the boy. "That's George. We did a picture together." His finger then shot over to the man on the right. "That's me. I found me," he said. Dr. Tucker has investigated more than 2,500 cases over a period of 15 years. One of the interesting phenomena in Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Tucker's work are cases where there are physical signs on the child's body that match the story that they recount. In Dr. Stevenson's book, Reincarnation and Biology, he investigates 225 cases of children who remembered their previous lives and who also had physical anomalies that matched those previous lives. Details that could be found confirmed by the dead person's autopsy reports, by photographs, or by eyewitness accounts of people who had seen the body. And Dr. Stevenson was very thorough in doing these investigations. There was a case of a young girl born without her lower right leg who spoke of a life where she had been run over by a train, or a Turkish boy with an underdeveloped right side who said he remembered the life of a man who died from a shotgun blast at point blank range. There was also the case of a young boy in Thailand with a small birthmark at the back of his head and a much larger birthmark at the front of his head, who told a story of a life where he had been shot in the head with a rifle. Some of the statistics from Dr. Tucker's work are quite interesting. They found that 60% of the children who claim past life memories are male, and that most of the memories occur between the ages of 2 and 6 years old. And this kind of seems to resonate with me, because when my daughter was that age, she would often talk about memories of a house that she used to live in, or her previous house, and she would talk of things from before. Nothing was ever very clear, but we kind of got the sense that she might have been referring to a memory from a previous lifetime. Dr. Tucker also found that 70% of the children claim they died a violent or an unnatural death. 90% of the children say they were the same sex in a previous life, and the median time between the claimed death and birth is 16 months. To me, it seems quite obvious that if a person can have physical signs of past life trauma, that there will also be energetic signs within the energy field. As an energy healer, what I look at is the energetic anatomy and where the energetic blockages are held within the energetic anatomy. So the energetic anatomy is made up of 5 key components. You'll probably be familiar with the chakras, the 7 primary chakras. There are also secondary chakras and minor chakras. And of course, you're aware of the aura. And within the aura, there are a number of layers, thousands in fact. Mostly we work on the lower 3 layers of the aura, the etheric body, the emotional body, and the mental body. But there are several others. And what I find is often the further out in the energy body you go, the further back in time those wounds, the further back in time are the wounds and the blockages that you find. Then we have the meridians that run through the body. They're primary meridians, secondary meridians, and then the nadis. We also have energy channels, such as the chakra channel that runs through all the chakras. We have a kundalini channel. Another important channel is the communication channel that runs from the communication center at the throat all the way into the divine. And the final part of the energetic anatomy are energy centers. Energy centers being slightly different to the chakras. So an energy center, for example, that's very important is the heart center. And surrounding the heart center, we have the heart field, which is a field of energy that surrounds the entire body. Other important energy centers are, for example, the dantian points, the lower dantian, the middle dantian, and the upper dantian. There's also kundalini center at the base of the spine and the ultra major at the top of the kundalini channel, and a number of others. So when working with energetic blockages, I find it useful to know where exactly in the energetic anatomy those blockages are. Now, when it comes to working with past life trauma, so I find that there are 3 key areas where past life trauma is held within the energetic anatomy. The first place is actually the etheric body, the innermost layer of the aura. The second area is the mental body, or the third layer of the aura. And then the final area is the heart field, the field of energy that surrounds the heart center. Of course, past life trauma can be held in any of the energy centers and any of the layers and any components of the energetic anatomy, just like current life blockages and traumas can be held. And I guess it becomes useful to understand how these blockages are formed in the first place. So say, for example, you're 13 years old and you get upset with your father and you have a lot of anger that isn't properly processed. That anger can form an energetic blockage that will be held somewhere within the energetic anatomy. It might be held in perhaps the emotional body, the second layer of the aura, where a lot of our current life emotional blockages are stored. It could also be stored within one of the chakras, perhaps the solar plexus chakra, which is related to our personal power. It could be held also perhaps in the masculine energy channel, which would be related to a dispute with your father. Now, a lot of blockages that are held within the energetic anatomy are actually quite small and can be released fairly easily. We can do this simply by breathing light with intention through that specific part of the energetic anatomy, and that would do quite a lot to release these blockages. At some points in the past where I was doing this work the slow way, I would find that there would typically be between 40 and 60 blockages in any particular part of the energetic anatomy. Of those blockages, I find that there's normally just a handful of more severe blockages that need specific attention to release. And depending on where in the energetic anatomy that blockage is, or what type of blockage it is, would determine how one would actually clear that. So the blockages can kind of be categorized as follows. We have emotional blockages, so formed where we have emotional trauma, intense negative emotions that aren't processed properly. We can also have thought forms, and often we would have thought forms in the mental body where we hold a strong thought about something. And often I find we have thought forms from past life trauma. So for example, if somebody was stabbed in the back in a past life, energetically, they might hold the image of that knife in their back in the mental body. And this then is a thought form. It's kind of like a mental snapshot of a past traumatic event. Another one that one might come across is if somebody had been hung in a past life, they might hold that thought form of the rope around their throat in the mental body. We also have wounds that we carry within our energetic anatomy. Now, a wound is kind of damage to a part of the energy field that was formed by past life or current life physical trauma. Now, I normally find these wounds in the etheric body, which is the innermost layer of the aura, and they are normally related to past life physical trauma. So where a person suffered a physical death in a past life and there was a physical cause that was traumatic. So for example, being stabbed in the back might cause a past life wound in the back, and that would be found in the etheric body. So when you connect to this wound, you'll be able to access the information around the cause of that wound. Now, how I came to discover this work is quite interesting. So when my daughter was young, she was generally very healthy and happy and a strong and robust child. But she started to get a regular chest infection where she would develop a cough. And on one occasion, this cough actually got quite bad. And we just couldn't shake it no matter what we did. And the doctors didn't seem to be able to help other than prescribe medication. And this particular chest infection on that occasion got so bad that it developed into pneumonia, and showed up as a dark spot on the lungs in the scan. The next time her chest started playing up, I decided that I was going to actually investigate this energetically. And working with my guides and channeling some information, I was taken deeper and deeper into the process as to what was the cause behind this recurrent chest infection. I'd already been releasing emotional blockages on the other layers of the energy field and was getting very, very good results in that I would release the emotional blockage and her chest would clear up. But once again, it was going a bit deeper and it wasn't clearing up as it should. And what I found is, as I connected to the wound and received information about the wound, is that my daughter had died in a previous lifetime in a fire. And in that fire, she had obviously suffered from the smoke inhalation. And this had caused an energetic wound on the lungs, around the chest, at that deep level of the etheric body. So the etheric body, being the innermost layer of the energy field, kind of mirrors the physical body. So there'll be energetic components to each organ as well as to the entire body. What was most interesting, I found, is that when I was guided to do the healing on that part of the etheric body, my daughter's symptoms eased up. Another interesting case was brought to me by my wife. She was being helped in her work by a sales assistant at a shop. And the sales assistant one day, just by chance, told my wife that no, it was her last day at work because she had to stay at home to look after her child. And they got talking. And what happened is the story as it came out was that the child was about a year old and was very sickly. So sickly, in fact, that this young boy hadn't been out the house for 6 months. Their medical aid was spent and they couldn't afford to have any childcare anymore. And so my wife offered this lady some help and offered my services to the lady. And obviously I agreed. A few days later, I had the opportunity to do the healing for this young boy. And what came out was that this boy had a wound that covered his entire etheric body, covered the entire etheric body from head to toe. And he had died in a bomb blast in World War II. So I was able to heal that wound on the etheric body for this boy. 2 days later, she called my wife to offer sincere gratitude because, he was noticeably better. And 18 months later, to this day, he has still not been back to the doctor. In another interesting case, I was working with a client who had cancer and had also twisted her ankle, so was unable to leave home. And so I went to go and visit her at her house. But before I went to go see her, I did my assessment of the energy. So I connected to the energy so that I could identify what was going on so that I would know what healing was required when I got there. So she starts to tell me a bit more about the case and so on, but it becomes quite apparent to me what is actually going on. She explains that she has a tumor behind the eye, and the tumor is causing a swelling on the eye. And I could see that there's a noticeable distortion in the shape of the head around the eye. At which point I show her my diagram, because what I had found in doing this work was she had been killed by an axe in a previous lifetime, and the axe was on that side of the head. And I often find this where there is a tumor, the growth point of the tumor starts where the etheric wound is. Now, most cases are actually quite complicated when it comes to dealing with adults. There are a number of layers of blockages in the energy field. So in this particular case, there was also blockages around that area that had kind of got stuck there in the emotional body and in the mental body, related to a number of other issues regarding to current life and past life stuff. But after a number of sessions, one could actually see quite visibly that the tumor was starting to shrink. In another case with a young child, I was contacted to try and help with an issue on the head. And there was some issue there was liquid dripping in the brain. And there was some reason for that I can't quite remember. But what was really interesting is after I'd had the discussion with the child's mother, I asked the mother about the child's stomach. I said, is there any birthmark or or any digestive trouble below the belly button. Because what I'd found in doing my assessment was that the child had been stabbed in the stomach in a previous lifetime. And there's some story, I think there was a dispute with his brother in that previous lifetime over land or inheritance or something. And what the mother said to me was actually, even surprising for me, in that when the child was born, the child had some condition where the stomach was actually on the outside of the body. And as soon as the child was born, they had to do an operation to put that stomach back onto the inside. In another case, I was working with somebody who, what I found was she had died in a fire in the previous lifetime. And there had been wounds all over the etheric body relating to this fire in the previous lifetime. But she then later described to me how she had always had a burning sensation on her forearms, that was ever present. And that burning sensation disappeared after I'd done the healing to the etheric body on the forearms and on the entire etheric body. So those are some interesting cases where there's past life trauma held in the etheric body. And normally in the etheric body, it is where there has been a past life physical trauma, and that is held in that part of the energy body. But not all past life trauma is physical. A lot of it is emotional. Where I find emotional trauma, I find that this is normally kept within the heart field, the field of energy that surrounds our heart center. Now, the first time I came across this was actually for myself. I was working through blockages on a sort of a one-by-one basis, sort of working through the blockages. And I kind of realized I was getting close to the end because I was also monitoring my heart frequency in comparison to my optimum heart frequency. And as I got to the last blockage, what I found is some really heavy guilt and grief and shame from a past life where my parents had died. And as I sort of did this healing and as I uncovered this trauma held within my heart field, I actually just broke down and cried. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for I don't know how long. And then afterwards, I just felt like so much lighter, so much relief from obviously this burden that I'd been carrying for many, many lifetimes. What was very interesting is at the time I was doing this, I still had another business. I had an importing business. And I had been working on a particular deal for a number of months. And I was waiting for this purchase order to come in from this company. And I'd kind of like almost forgotten about it because it was taking so long. But the day after I'd cleared the blockages in my heart field, I got the email with the purchase order from this company. And it was almost like it was a sign from the universe. It was like, okay, you've cleared the blockages. Now this divine life force energy can start flowing through your heart. It can really start flowing and connecting you to life. And it's almost like, the river of life could open up, and this energy was just so much greater after that point. So the process I now use to heal those traumas, those emotional traumas in the heart field, is what's called the soul retrieval. And the soul retrieval is a shamanic term for retrieving a part of the soul that was lost or damaged in the past. Now, there are a number of ways of doing the soul retrieval. In the shamanic method, the shaman goes into a trance and goes back in time to do the healing and to retrieve that lost soul. I've also been trained in another method of doing this, which is called called timeline therapy. Timeline therapy is kind of like a sort of non-spiritual way of doing it, and it uses language that is non-spiritual in any way. And there are a couple of other ways that sort of merge these. My favorite way is to take people on a guided meditation where I guide them back in time to do this healing on their soul. And this is the process that I use for most people. Obviously, if I'm working with a child or an animal, then I kind of use the shamanic method where I go back and I do that healing myself. Now, one of the interesting cases that I had was with a Muslim lady who didn't really believe in past life stuff. And this was the first soul retrieval session. So I wasn't really expecting her to go back into a past life. But as it happened, she did. And she simply started describing a scene where in that lifetime, she found herself in a basement, locked in a basement that was very dark. And through the floorboard, she could see some kind of conflict taking place up above her. And what was happening in the conflict was there was a man who murdered a woman above her. And the reason that the clients had been seeing me was for anxiety. And what came up in this particular soul retrieval was that she was experiencing that anxiety in that moment. And the anxiety actually came from that trauma, being stuck in that basement, hoping that she wouldn't be found, almost witnessing this murder. And that is kind of one of the main signs that there's a soul retrieval that kind of is ready to be healed. People tend to feel the emotions of the event. And it's kind of like feeling an emotion where you don't really know where that emotion is coming from. In another example, I was working with a client who had a couple of phobias and a few fears, one of which was claustrophobia. And we were taken back to a lifetime where, as a young girl, she was working in a coal mine in Wales. And as a young girl working in the coal mine, she was subjected to frequent sexual abuse. And in order to heal that trauma, we first were taken to another trauma where the same thing happened. And we had to do healing on the sexual trauma that she had suffered as a child in her current lifetime. And all three of these previous sexual traumas were related. So we had to do the healing on all of them in order to retrieve that part of her soul that had been damaged or left behind through that trauma. In that particular instance, there was also an etheric wound around the reproductive organs related to the past life trauma. And I often find that where there is past life sexual trauma, there is the etheric wound around the reproductive organs that can cause symptoms, anything from endometriosis to polycystic ovaries, reproductive issues. So you can do the healing of the physical trauma at the etheric body, but then the emotional trauma is healed in the heart field. I often find that where there is past life sexual trauma, the people have often come together in their current life. And often that relationship is tumultuous. It's almost like they're drawn together energetically to either learn the lessons or to make amends for what happened in the previous lifetime. And normally by the time a client comes to see me, that relationship is over, but there's still this sort of energetic connection in many ways that can be cleared in various ways. Where there's past life relationship trauma, there can be cords, like energetic cords that connect those two people together through the chakras. There can also be a past life contract. So this is kind of like where you make an oath or a pact to be together for all eternity. And as you're probably aware, people grow at different rates. So somebody might progress on their spiritual path much faster than their partner, and yet they've made the strong energetic pact to be together forever. And what lands up is a kind of difficulty resulting from wanting to be together and having the energetic pull together from the contract, but still being on different spiritual journeys. One person sort of wanting to progress in a different way or wanting to do something different with their life. So those past life pacts can hold you back. And sometimes there is just a kind of like a karmic entanglement where you're kind of drawn together and move apart again afterwards without any particular cord or contract or anything else holding you together. And there is another area where I find past life energy being stuck, and this is in the extended light body. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what I tend to find is the further out in the energy field you go, the further back in time the blockages tend to be. Now, in the extended light body, which is between layers 6 and 16 of the aura, we find what I call the aspects of the extended light body. So if you consider the layers of your aura kind of as layers of an onion, and these layers move outwards for several thousand layers. Now, they're not really layers, they're more like frequency bands that all start in the middle and move outwards. But we can understand that concept clearer if we look at it in terms of layers. Now, the aspects of the extended light body are more like segments of a nachi. Now, if you're not South African, a nachi is kind of like a South African satsuma. So the aspects go around the energy field and permeate a number of layers of the aura. There are 17 aspects of the extended light body. These cover subjects such as money or wealth, relationships, our parents, children, siblings, and a number of other things, kind of covering all aspects of life. And where we have trauma or energetic blockage relating to a particular aspect, that energy kind of gets stuck in the energy field in one of these aspects. Now, we don't really have segments of a nachi around our energy field, but it's kind of like a metaphor. And if you can understand this metaphorically and use this image to try and understand what I'm trying to explain with words, you might get it. So one of the first clients I worked with on this subject was very clairvoyant and could see quite clearly. And she was struggling with her money. She was struggling to earn enough money, and it just seemed blocked in that area. And I asked her to describe what she saw when I had guided her into this process of connecting to the money aspect of her extended light body. And she described it as a dark place filled with cobwebs and shadows and really seemed quite like clogged up and congealed with a thick tar-like substance. So we did the process and we went through the steps to clear this. And afterwards, at the end of the process, she described it as being filled with light and filled with energy and flowing. And obviously she noticed over the next few weeks that her money issues seemed to ease up somewhat. So the extended light body holds a lot of the energetic debris from our previous incarnations. And this energetic debris is held within these segments or within these aspects of the extended light body. So, as previously mentioned, we hold a lot of minor blockages within the energy field. And these minor blockages can be cleared out just through directed breath work, visualizing light, and just using our intention to clear these blockages. There are, however, a number of other blockages that are more severe that are held within the energy field. And when it comes to past life blockages, I tend to find these major blockages either in the etheric body, where it comes to past life physical trauma, in the mental body, where there's a lot of past life emotional trauma, or the thought forms, which is like a mental snapshot of a past life trauma. And then, of course, a lot of energetic debris from past life can be found in the extended light body, the aspects of the extended light body. The symptoms that people experience from this past life trauma vary from person to person. Some people might not experience any physical or emotional symptoms at all. Other people might have physical symptoms, especially where there is the trauma on the etheric body. Sometimes wounds to the skin might show up in the current life as eczema or sensitive skin or other conditions of the skin. Where there is a trauma that affects part of the body, you might feel that. So where somebody has been stabbed in the stomach, they might feel frequent pain in the stomach, or they might have a sensitive digestive system. Where there's trauma that's affected the lungs, there will certainly be issues with the lungs in many circumstances, where people have had trauma on their throats. They might have frequent throat trouble, especially when they're children. When they're children, they might find that they often have tonsil issues or throat issues or sore throats. So by tuning into this energy, one can actually identify where it comes from and what it is. Often energetic symptoms fluctuate. So that the energetic symptom might show itself in times of heightened emotional stress or heightened physical stress, and then might disappear completely for days, weeks, months at a time. But it is possible to alleviate these symptoms by clearing the energetic blockages within the energetic anatomy. And it is quite possible to do that fairly easily. And once the energetic body has healed, once you've healed the wounds and the blockages within the energetic anatomy, the physical body can heal itself, and it will begin to heal itself quite naturally. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If you've got any questions, please feel free to email me at mark@markbind.com, or you can find my website, markbind.com, or connect with me on Facebook, Mark Bind Energy Healer. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.